All right, so I wanted to return to this idea of Ireland as the first English colony. And actually, I'm going to back up a little bit because I want to give a little bit of history of the British Isles, especially since, we are speaking English, the language of the Angles, a Germanic tongue, um, and that, we're the United States is a country because of the British, and the British. The UK, the United Kingdom, is a mixture of several different peoples that kind of really, I think, demonstrate some of the complexities that we see here. Well, so let me just explain. You had the British Isles, and the British Isles were full of their own native peoples we'd call the Celts. Okay? And the Romans invaded, and in fact, King Arthur was some of the early, one of those early kind of Roman Celtic fusions. But I actually want to put that aside for a sec. You had in the lower Germanic peoples, in other words, much like the Vikings, actually, you had the Utes or the Jutes, Angles, and the Saxons. Anglo-Saxon is where we get the term from. And long story short, they invade the British Isles, and that they take over land at the expense of the natives, the Celts. The Welsh, one of the groups there, Wales, the land of right, okay, it's like Wallace, or I believe that's the right word. In Anglo-Saxon, means foreigner or slave. So and it's funny to refer to the Welsh people as foreigners when it's the foreigners who are actually going in there and dominating them. And so the Welsh were conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, and then you also had other Celtic groups, which are going to be the Highlands of Scotland, or Scotland, Scottish, okay, and you're going to have the Irish. Um, and these are all relatively, these are related peoples, okay? And you have the Isle of Man, that's another topic. Let's just focus on Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and especially right now, Ireland. So, um, the the Anglo-Saxons end up taking part of the island for some time. And then they're going to eventually conquer Scotland. We've all seen Braveheart, a train wreck. It's a train wreck of a movie when it comes to history. Okay, I like watching the film too. Okay, I love watching Braveheart, and it's complete garbage historically. I hate to tell it to you. I'm gonna just okay, like most Hollywood things. Okay, on so many levels, it's such a bad film of history, but it's based on history like the movie 300 is. But again, a train wreck of actual history. Okay, so um, what you see though is that the lowlands of Scotland end up getting colonized and settled by Anglo-Saxons, and then there's Normans later on, which I don't want to bog you down with that. It's when the French-speaking Normans come in 1066, and they start creating these nobles there, and the clan system starts to come up. And so what you have is Scotland has, especially in the Highlands, are more of the indigenous people who some documented as actually being Irish, but in any case, they're Gaelic or Gallic, and their language is different. So Irish is an actual language. Okay, there is Irish, and it's not related to English. It's not Germanic. And then the Gaelic Scottish tongue is also, and original Welsh. And then you had Scots. That's another Scottish language, which is still a Germanic tongue. Okay, and my last name Pollock is named after the lands of Pollock, and the founder was actually an Anglo-Norman conqueror. Okay, some of the Scottish clans were actually named after the founders were actually even Vikings, like the Gun Clan and the MacLeods. So it's more multi-ethnic. But definitely strongly identifying themselves as Scottish. And the indigenous people of the Highlands were considered wild people, kind of like Native Americans, or savages, if you will. And it's interesting, the transformation of Scottish nationalism and identity, because now we go to the Highland Games, right? The Highlander kind of represents almost like the ideal Scottish person, but the relationship between the Highlands and the Lowlands, due to this kind of ethnic composition, is varied over time. And then in regards to the Irish were seen as also savages by the Anglo-Saxons. And then as the religious wars, to top it off, them remaining Catholic, and then Scotland and England and the English being of Protestant descent are going to compound that. Now, about the 16th century is when the English seriously attempted to colonize Ireland. And like I said, they thought of them as savages. And once they were conquering them, they would bring over many people from Scotland, some of the lowlands, and some of the English to basically help work plantations, these colonies, on behalf of the English. And that's where you get the term Scots-Irish. These were colonizers coming in to help kind of put facts on the ground and establish like an English/Scottish presence. Okay. And Sir Humphrey Gilbert, establishes the first New World colony, but he was the governor of the Irish district first, and he suppressed uprisings of the Irish there very viciously. And so there is where he set in motion the idea of colonists must have rigid separation from the natives. So I want you to get this, soak this in for a second. What I'm saying is that the English, the way that they're going to set up, the English colonists, of setting up these kind of forts like in America and at the expense of the Native Americans, is going to be an experiment used first on the Irish, as in the native Irish people, okay? And you're going to see later many Irish come. Remember, the experience of the Protestant Scots-Irish is going to be different than that of the indigenous Catholic Irish. But in Ireland, even the Northerners are going to start seeing themselves as Irish in the same way that the colonizers of various ethnic stocks in lowlands of Scotland were going to see themselves as being Scottish. And here, why? So I guess the question is, what am I trying to say, or what's the point I want you to understand? I want you to think about the fact that all of this treatment of using slaves, of racism towards the people here that are going to take place in the Americas, was something first happening in the British Isles with people that look the same over there. And that those of us in the United States, in a sense, the United States is one of the first countries to make whites all get along at the expense of somebody else. You could almost argue that. Even though there was even going to still be a lot of racism against Irish originally later on. But over time, not so much the case. So I'm not sure if you're fully getting the point of what I'm trying to say, but that little background, I think, does help kind of lead us into thinking about some of the background to European settlement that's going to take place here and where it stems from. Okay, so and then other nations were also interested in this new world. The French, I think, had the strongest position for a long time. It would have been easy to see this actually being a nation where majority of us spoke French and was dominated by the French. But later on, we'll learn why that's not the case and how that was not the case. But the first permanent settlement in America is at Quebec in 1608. And there is, in fact, my friend lives in that area in Canada, people who in Quebec want to separate, militants who want to create their own country separate of Canada. Quebecois is the tongue, I believe. There's a term for it, but they still speak their own version of French, and many of them see themselves as a completely independent nation. You have few French settlers that attained much territory due to relationships with the native populations and often intermarriage. Where the French were different is they really did mix more with the Native American peoples instead of seeing themselves as separate. That's what's different, and especially maybe because of the fact that the nature of their business was fur trapping. And I think that, because it's not something that you necessarily want to settle to do, but you want to move around, that it seemed to make sense in their interests to have that kind of more closer relationship with the natives than, setting up colonies to grow tobacco or something like that we're going to see from like the English. And then they also got themselves entangled with tribal conflicts. Now the Dutch, which we don't think of much having legs here, but Holland was a leading trading nation. They maintained active trade in furs trade around New York. And in 1624, the Dutch West India Company established trading posts on the Hudson, Delaware, and Connecticut rivers. Colony of New Netherlands, as it was said, with the town of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. And then it would be renamed New York, New York. Could you imagine hearing New Netherlands, New Netherlands? No, New York, New York sounds, it flows better, right? Or what would Frank Sinatra do if it remained the New Netherlands? I don't know. Okay, sorry about that joke. Anyhow, so it was New York in 1667 in honor of the Duke of York, later James II of England. Okay, so that's just to give you a little bit of insight into some of that background. Here's a map that kind of helps visualize around 1700 what this area looked like in terms of European colonization, okay, and the lands that were being dominated. And so that's it for this section. If you have any question, as I always say, please. Okay, so that's it for this section. And as I always mention, please send any questions or clarifications. And if you think I got anything wrong, feel free to always also help send something my way. I'll post something for the class if there's anything that I said incorrectly, but I'm not too worried about that right now. The bottom line is I hope this was informative, and that as you read your text, you'll see I didn't cover everything that was in the text, but this should give you a good grasp on this particular section as we move forward to the next one.